Hey guys, my name is Haley and today I'm going to be talking about how I read so much. I have never been asked to do this, but when I talk to people in my real life about how much I actually read, they're a little bit shocked, which I guess is normal for people on BookTube who do normally read more than the average population, but I feel like I read a lot for BookTube a lot of the time, like as in very easily 100 plus books a year, and like an average is like 10 books a month usually. So I figured I would chat about not necessarily tips and tricks, but I guess they would be if that's what you're looking for. So I'm just going to talk about what I do with my reading and like almost reading habits, but more like time management skills, I feel like. And first off, I feel like the most obvious one is you have to make time for it. Like with anything else, with any hobby or any like thing you have to do for work or anything that you enjoy, you have to make time to do it or you're not going to do it. So like it all comes down to time management skills in general. So if you're spending like 10 hours a night watching Netflix, you're probably not going to be reading during that time. So I feel like even if you have to stagger different days of doing different hobbies, that's an option as well. But I will say I mainly have two hobbies, and that is reading and K-pop, so I kind of intertwine those two things. I don't really watch TV and movies like I haven't in many years. Like that's just not how I've chosen to spend my time, besides like very specific things that I'm very interested in. Like I could not tell you the last TV show that I watched. It might have been like The Walking Dead like 3 years ago, so there are TV shows that I love and TV shows I would enjoy watching and that I do want to eventually watch, especially like K-dramas, but I have not made the time to do that necessarily. But then something like Hamilton, obviously I love that. It's 3 hours long, so I have to make the time of putting off another one of my hobbies in order to do that, which I do on occasion, but not that often. The other biggest thing that has made the biggest difference in my reading in the last probably close to 2 years now, I don't actually know when I started listening to them, and that is audiobooks. Mainly because there are times when I want to get a bunch of other stuff done, like cleaning my room or like watching one of the babies or like, I don't know, house sitting or just like organizing things or something that doesn't require my entire brain power. So I can listen so I'm getting reading done, but also be productive in some other way, like laundry. I feel like I do audiobooks a lot when I'm doing laundry, and I do laundry relatively often, so maybe less because of the pandemic, but I still do it pretty often. Or like the other week, I like reorganized my entire room. Besides these shelves, everything else around me is different. And I listened to like probably an entire audiobook by doing that. Or even like reorganizing my bookshelves. Just little random productive things. If I can be listening to something instead of listening to music, I am more likely to listen to an audiobook. So like as far as audiobooks, that's more of me being productive. I don't often just sit and like play an audiobook. If I am, I have to be doing something else or I will get bored. So like I'll play Candy Crush or like a random game or like online shop while listening to the audiobook. And then as far as physical reading, when I do physical read, I definitely need to have the time to sit down for like at least an hour or I won't do it. Like I am not someone who can sit there and read like 10 pages and be done. Like I do not do that, and I haven't done that in a very long time. I'm more likely to read an entire book in like a 3 or 4 hour span on like a Saturday afternoon than I am to read like 10 pages here and there in between other things that I have to do. And then another one that I have recently gotten more into is ebooks, and that's because I am back with a newborn with nannying. I think I talked about this in my last video, and that is, I like having the ebook. Ebooks aren't the same as physical books for me in that I can read like 10 to 20 pages in the span of like 20 minutes and then put it down and be fine because I can bookmark it. Probably because it's much easier for me to hold, especially while holding a baby or a newborn or like while the baby is amusing themselves like a toddler. If he's playing with his trucks or something on the other side of the room and I like can see him, I'll read a little bit like here and there if I'm doing absolutely nothing or when he goes down for a nap and I can't put an audiobook on and I don't have a physical book with me. I have been bringing my Kindle around because it like fits in my purse and it's very easy to carry, so I have been reading a lot more on my Kindle because of that. Another thing I feel like I've done a lot more over the last year especially is finding people on BookTube, like booktubers, who read very different things from me or just read things that I've never heard of. Because I used to very much be the person that like mostly followed SFF booktubers like for the sci-fi and fantasy world, but then it gets down to a lot of the time, especially the bigger booktubers will all be reading the same thing and I hear about the same 10 books over and over and over and therefore get zero book recs. So if I want recommendations, I do try out booktube channels a lot. Like I'll watch like I'll find someone's channel and watch like a couple wrap-ups, and like if they have anything that's remotely interesting, I'll probably subscribe and like keep an eye on them just for book recs and recommendations and things. Like I very much have been looking for people who read a lot more horror or thrillers, and I've even been looking for more people who read a lot of like sci-fi, which I have completely taken a turn on my like preferring fantasy over everything else. I don't think I've read a fantasy book this year. Or if it was technically fantasy, it was closer to sci-fi or that like mixture of sci-fi and fantasy. So I think my genre favorites have been changing from like year to year, so that has definitely made a difference too. But then again, I'm also someone that has always read all over the board, and like I don't box myself into a certain genre. Like when I first joined BookTube, I probably would have told you very easily that fantasy was my favorite like genre to read. But I've always sort of just read all over the place. Like I read sci-fi, I read fantasy, I occasionally read contemporary, I read a lot of horror and thrillers now. I have discovered my niche of like usually what's my favorite thing is speculative fiction, which is like Hank Green's book, The Book of M, The Warehouse, The Circle. Like those have all been my favorites of the last few years, and that's how I realized that's one of my favorite things to read about is books with social commentaries. So I only found that out by trying out a bunch of different genres. Like if the synopsis is interesting, I don't care what the genre is mainly what I go off of. Another obvious thing that I feel like gets talked about a lot on BookTube and these like how to read more videos is DNFing, which again, I have been DNFing books as in did not finish all the time. Like if it's a subject like that comes up in the first like 25% of the book that I know I'm not gonna like and like will be detrimental to my mental health or brain, I will stop reading it. And that's not to say that you're not going to be reading problematic content, but I feel like Kate just had a whole video about this, how there's a difference between something that is a trigger and something that just makes you uncomfortable because you don't understand it. So it's more of me realizing where that line is and realizing what type of subjects are detrimental for me to read about and then what type of subjects I could learn from. So my DNFs tend to be of that nature, although there are a lot of the times a DNF will be this was boring and I had zero interest in what was going on, because I just did that with a book called Children of Time. I was like, this is supposed to be like a horror sci-fi and nothing is happening and I'm so bored, so I DNF'd that audiobook. I will say I don't DNF audiobooks as often as I would like physical books. Probably because audiobooks are so easy for me to listen to while doing something else, and I'm not doing that when I'm reading a physical book. Like I'm very specifically focusing on that, so I'm more likely to DNF when it's physical or even ebook. I don't think I've DNF'd any ebooks actually, now that I'm thinking about it, but yeah, I am less likely to DNF an audiobook because it's not taking my most like active attention, but I do DNF them from time to time. Oh, another thing that I DNF for a lot is when books tend to paint religion as this like horrible, like worst thing on the planet, especially when it's focused on Christianity and it like takes the Bible out of context. That's like a pretty much immediate DNF for me. I'm like, nope, don't want that. That's wrong. And that's just coming from my own personal beliefs. And like there are times that it can be done like okay in a speculative way, and then there are times when it's just becomes bashing on all religions, which I am not a fan of. And then last, I feel like this should be obvious to people who have multiple hobbies and things that they enjoy, but I'm very much someone that I don't get into reading slumps, and I think it's because I let myself not read when I don't feel like it. Like if I am not in a reading mood, I am probably listening and watching K-pop videos for like a week, and then once I get that out of my system, I'll go right back to reading. So I'm not someone that gets reading slumps. I think the last time I had one was probably like over a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago, like it doesn't happen to me. Like I'll not read for like 2 or 3 weeks, but it's not because I'm in a slump per se. It's just because I've decided to devote my time to something else for that couple of weeks or however long it is, and it doesn't bother me, probably because I read so much in general that if I'm not reading, I'm like, well, I'm not gonna get behind on my Goodreads goal. Like that has not happened to me in a very long time, so I'm not as worried about it, because I feel like if you're forcing yourself to do something that you're not enjoying, you're not gonna like it and you're not gonna want to do it anymore. So, oh, one more thing I wanted to talk about is, especially with ebooks, because I feel like a lot of people read ebooks on their phone, and this is why I could never read ebooks before, because being on my phone, I get notifications. So I do the distracted reading thing of like reading 3 pages and then I get a Twitter notification and I'm like, oh, what's that? And then like forget that I was reading because I went on Twitter for like half an hour. That is something I feel like a lot of people do. They do that distracted reading. They're like, I read for 3 hours today, but they were really on their phone for like 2 of those 3 hours. So I would be wary of that, to like carve out time of not getting on your phone or on the laptop or whatever and take away the distractions. And I know that's not the case for everybody. Like your mom, if you're a mom, you have to like pay attention to your children, but like if you're doing this for fun, to relax, or to just do something you enjoy, I feel like you have to be able to devote the time to it or you're not really enjoying it, if that makes any sense. But yeah, those are some of the tips that I have. I don't want to say tips because I feel like all of these are very obvious, but maybe they're not. That is indeed how I would say that I read so much, is how I often hear it called, because I think I've been averaging over 100 books for like 3 or 4 years now. And when I tell people in real life that, they're like, excuse me, most people read like 5 to 10 books a year, if they read at all. So yeah, that's what I do. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know any of your tips and tricks for reading more down below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.